Hey guys, our topic for this video is going to be solving quadratics using the square root method. So this is going to be our third method for solving quadratic functions. So we have solving by factoring, solving by the quadratic formula, and now solving by using the square root method. Something that's really important is that you can only use this method when the b value is 0. So if there is a b value besides 0, then you cannot use this method. Here are a few things that you always need to remember. The first one is that there can be no b value. You must get the x squared by itself, and when you take the square root, you must use the plus or minus. You need the plus or minus because if you're squaring a negative number, it's still going to give you a positive. So for example, 2 squared is 4, but when you square negative 2, it's also 4. So we're going to take a look at our first example. The first example that we're going to look at is x squared equals 16. First of all, you need to decide, can you use the square root method? We can use the square root method here because there's no b value. So there's no just x. We have an x squared. So what we're going to do in order to get rid of the squared is we're going to take the square root of both sides. So taking the square root of both sides is going to get rid of our x squared. When we take the square root of both sides, we have to always remember that we have to do a plus or minus in front. Then the last thing that we need to do is actually evaluate the square root of 16. We know the square root of 16 is 4, so our answer is plus or minus 4, and you are done with this question. Right, our next example is going to be 2x squared minus 50 equals 0. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we can use the square root method. So if we look at this problem, the a is 2, the c is negative 50, but there's no b value. So since there's no b value, we can try to use this method. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get the x squared by itself. We're first going to do that by adding 50 to both sides. So when we add 50 to both sides, we get 2x squared equals 50. Next, in order to get the x squared by itself, we're going to need to divide by 2. So when we divide by 2, we have x squared equals 25. Lastly, what we have to do to get the square root, or to get the squared by itself, we have to take the square root. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. Remember, when you take the square root of both sides, it is very important that you keep the plus or minus. So then we have plus or minus the square root of 25. We know the square root of 25 is 5. So our answer is x equals plus or minus 5. Alright, the last example that we're going to look at in this video is this one right here. This one looks a little bit different than the other ones that we've done. Notice here how you have the quantity x minus 3 and then the squared on the outside. Since the squared's on the outside, you can do the same thing. So in order to get rid of the squared, we're going to go ahead and start by taking the square root of both sides. So when we take the square root of both sides, we have x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 16. And again, there's that plus or minus again. That's the most important part of doing this. Alright, now we can evaluate the square root of 16. So when we evaluate the square root of 16, we know that that's 4. So we get x minus 3 equals plus or minus 4. Now, when we were doing quadratic formula and we had the plus or minus, remember we rewrote the problem. We wrote it once with the plus and once with the minus. We're going to do the same thing here. So in your notes, you want to write x minus 3 equals 4 and x minus 3 equals negative 4. Once you have both of those, you can add 3 to both sides and solve for the x. And then the same thing over here. Add 3 to both sides and solve for the x. When you do that, you should get x equals 7 and x equals negative 1. That's the last example that I'm going to do with you, but I'm going to leave you 2 for you to try. The first one I would like you to try is 7x squared plus 1 equals 49. And the second one is 2x squared plus 144 equals 0. And then the question that I would like you to think about is, can either of these examples not be solved? And I would like you to tell me why or why not. As a reminder, remember that you should be watching these videos more than once. I've seen some students watching it once, going through and just watching it again and taking notes, and then watching it a third time and going back and writing comments. Those are excellent things that I have seen from some students in your class.